Brian was sitting in his studio. His first client was due at 8. He opened the workshop gate, letting in the cold autumn air. Max, the old German shepherd dog left behind by his ex-wife, slowly got up from his spot in the corner and stretched. "Good morning, Mr. Matthews," the postman called out as he passed the workshop. "More letters from the bank today." "Thanks, Tony." Brian took the envelopes. 3 reminders of the debt. He put them on the table with the other unread letters. The phone rang. Brian wiped his hands on his overalls. "Matthews Auto Repair. Go ahead." "Brian, it's Robert from the bank. We need to talk about your payments." "Robert, He stopped talking when he saw Mrs. Wilson's old Ford pull into the shop. "You've missed 2 payments in a row. If by the end of the week— Excuse me, I have a client. I'll call you back." Mrs. Wilson, a 70-year-old widow, got out of the car. "Oh, Brian, it's making that strange sound again." "Let's have a look." He opened the hood. "How are your grandchildren?" "Fine." She took a photo out of her bag. Brian smiled, even though he was cramped inside. He knew he would have to repair her car again for next to nothing. Mrs. Wilson was living on a pension, and parts were getting more expensive every month. Across the street, the Quick Fix Auto Service sign shone. The new chain service station had opened 6 months ago. Brian saw his loyal customers flocking there one by one, tempted by the flashy advertising and promotional discounts. "You know, Mr. Matthews," Mrs. Wilson lowered her voice, "my nephew told me to try that new service. They say it's cheaper." Brian tensed, but tried to keep his voice calm. "You have the right to choose, Mrs. Wilson, but I've known your car for 15 years, every feature of it." She sighed. "I know, Brian. That's why I'm here." By lunchtime, he had inspected 3 cars. He didn't take a break. He ate a sandwich in the shop while going over the invoices. The parts supplier had raised prices again. There was an offer from Quick Fix on the table. They wanted to buy his premises. Max came over and put his head on his lap. Brian automatically scratched him behind the ear. "What do you think, buddy? Maybe it's time to give up." The doorbell rang. A young man in a suit stood on the doorstep. "Mr. Matthews, I'm from Quick Fix. We'd like to discuss our offer. I've already told you the workshop is not for sale, but you haven't even looked at the price." "With your debts," Brian stood up abruptly. "Thank you for coming in. Have a nice day." In the evening, as he locked up the workshop, he looked at the photo on the wall. His father opening this workshop in '62. Next to it was his own photo when he first took over. Back then, 12 years ago, everything seemed simpler. Catherine was still around, and the plan seemed clear. He went up to his apartment above the workshop. He looked at the empty walls. Catherine had taken almost all the photos when she left. "You work too much," she said then. "I can't be second to your studio anymore." The phone rang again. The bank number. "Yes, Robert." "Brian, I'm trying to help, but if you don't make at least part of the payment by Friday, we're going to have to—" "I know. I'll work something out." He sat down at the kitchen table, spreading out the bills. The last month had been particularly difficult, with many clients asking for an extension. He hadn't turned anyone down. Mrs. Wilson, the Thompson family with their old minivan, a young mother with 2 children and a broken-down Chevy, they were all counting on him. Max put his face in his lap. The dog had aged along with the workshop. Gray face, slow gait, but his eyes still looked loyal. "Oh, buddy," Brian stroked him. "What would my father say if he saw what I've done to his business?" The rain was pounding on the roof of the workshop when Brian heard a tentative knock on the door. The clock read 8:30. He usually opened at 9, but his customers knew that. "I'm sorry," a woman's voice trembled. "I know it's early, but—" A young woman stood in the doorway, soaked to the skin. A boy of about 6 years old huddled next to her, holding her hand tightly. Water dripped from her sweater to the floor. "Come in." Brian quickly took a towel from the closet. "Here, wipe yourself off." "Thank you." She tried to smile, but her lips were trembling. "I'm our car," she choked back tears. "Sit down." Brian pulled out a chair for her. "What's your name?" "Daisy. And this is Michael." She patted the boy's head. "We live on Oak Street. I work at the Blue Diner." "I know that place." Brian nodded. Michael looked up. "Mom makes the best pancakes. Don't they, Mom?" Daisy wiped her eyes. "The car just stalled in the middle of the road. We walked for almost an hour. I know it's an old Honda, but we need it. I can't take Michael to school on the bus. I have to make it to the morning shift. Where's the car now?" "It's on Maple Avenue near the supermarket. She took out her wallet with trembling hands. "I have some money. Maybe enough for a tow truck? I could pay for the repairs in installments." Brian looked out the window. The rain was getting worse. "I'll take your car. Michael can wait here if you want. There's hot chocolate and cookies." The boy's eyes shone. "May I, Mom?" Half an hour later, Brian returned with her Honda in tow. He lifted the car onto the lift and began to inspect it. "Cylinder head," he muttered, "and the pump needs to be replaced." Daisy stood next to him, clutching an empty coffee cup. "Is it expensive?" Brian could see the fear in her eyes. He saw the same in the mirror every morning when he opened the letters from the bank. "Look," he wiped his hands on his arm, "I can fix it. Leave the car until tomorrow. But I won't be able to pay everything at once. We'll figure it out." He tried to sound confident. "Do you have someone to give you a ride home?" "I'll call a taxi." "No need. I'll drive you. I have to go get some parts anyway." In the car, Michael looked at the old tools on the back seat with fascination. "Are you a real mechanic? Like in the movies?" Brian smiled. "Not exactly like in the movies. Everything looks simpler there." "Michael," Daisy turned around, "can you fix my mom's car?" "Brian Matthews. And it's all right." Outside their house, an old two-story mansion divided into apartments, Daisy hesitated. "Mr. Matthews, I really don't know when I'll be able to pay. Maybe you should try that new service. They'll charge more." He tried not to think about the bill from the parts supplier. "Trust me." That night he worked until midnight. He had to take the pump from his own stock. He couldn't afford to order a new one anyway. He found the cylinder head gasket in his father's old boxes. Max was lying next to him, watching the owner struggle with the rusty bolts. "You know, man," Brian wiped the sweat from his brow, "my dad always said, sometimes you just have to help a person even if it doesn't bring you anything." At 2 in the morning, he finally finished. His hands were shaking with fatigue. Tomorrow he would have to explain to the supplier why he was late again. In the morning, Daisy came in early, alone, her waitress uniform carefully ironed. "I took Michael to a neighbor's house." She nervously crumpled her wallet in her hands. "How long have I—" "The engine's fine," Brian interrupted her. "I changed the oil, the filters too. It should last a long time." "But how much did it cost?" He handed her the keys. "Nothing." "What?" She took a step back. "I can't. It's not right." "Yes, you can," he smiled tiredly. "And get it checked out regularly." She looked at him, and tears rolled down her cheeks. "You don't understand. It means so much to us." "I do," he said, turning away, pretending to look for something in the toolbox. After she left, Brian looked at the invoices on the table for a long time. The supplier will be furious. The bank would send another warning. But somewhere inside, he felt strangely calm, for the first time in a long time. Max came over and licked his hand. "Yeah, buddy," Brian scratched him behind the ear. "Dad would be pleased. He didn't know that this act would change his life. He didn't know that kindness was returned in unexpected ways. Now he was just getting ready for a new day at work, as he had been doing for the past 20 years. Daisy sat in the kitchen of her small apartment while Michael slept in the next room. The clock read 11:30 in the evening. She had just come back from her evening shift at the diner, and her legs were tired. But she couldn't sleep. Her thoughts kept returning to the incident of 2 days ago. She opened Facebook on her old laptop and started writing. Today, I want to tell a story about a person who gave me back my faith in goodness. My name is Daisy Thompson. I am a waitress at Blue Diner in Spring Valley. I am raising my son alone. The day before yesterday, my car broke down. It was a disaster for me. Without a car, I wouldn't be able to take my son to school and get to work on time. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Should she write about it? But something compelled her to continue. I arrived at Matthew's auto repair shop early in the morning, soaking wet from the rain with my 6-year-old son. Mr. Matthews wasn't even open, but he let us in. He didn't just fix my car. He refused to take money. I saw the parts he replaced. I know how much they cost, but he just gave me the keys and wished me a good day. This man saved not just my car. He saved my ability to work, to take my son to school, to live a normal life. And he did it for nothing, without expecting anything in return. She clicked publish and closed her laptop. Tomorrow, she had to get up early for her shift. The next morning, Brian noticed that something had changed. A car with license plates from a neighboring town arrived at the workshop. Then another one, and then another. "Are you Mr. Matthews?" a woman asked as she got out of the brand new Ford. "I read about you on Facebook." He still didn't understand what was happening when the phone rang. It was Mrs. Wilson. "Brian, darling, I just read that nice girl's post. You know, I've always told everyone how you helped me with my car after Henry died. When I couldn't pay, what post?" He scratched the back of his head. "On Facebook. Oh, you don't use those fancy things. A girl wrote about you, and you know, I wrote a comment too. And Mrs. Parker wrote about how you fixed her old Chevy." By lunchtime, the shop was packed. People were waiting for their turn, talking to each other. Brian overheard a snippet of conversation. "You know, he helped my son with his first car last year. The guy had just started working and had no money. Matthews took half the price and taught him basic maintenance. Oh, it's like with my aunt. She's a pensioner. He's working for her for free." Brian locked himself in his office. His hands were shaking. He pulled out his phone and found Facebook. Daisy's post had already received 3,000 reposts. The comments kept coming. "This man is a real hero. When my car broke down on the highway, he came and helped me for nothing. Mr. Matthews saved our family trip. We got stuck in their city. He worked all night. I've been taking my car to him for 5 years. He has never overcharged me. Everything is honest." In the evening, Brian sat in his office looking through the comments. He hadn't realized that so many people remembered his help. Mrs. Henderson wrote about how he had repaired her car on credit when she was undergoing chemotherapy. The Baker family recalled how he helped them when they lost their jobs during the recession. Late one night, as he was closing up shop, Daisy came in. She looked worried. "Mr. Matthews, I didn't think my post was going to be—" "It's okay," he smiled tiredly. "But now everyone knows. About your kindness, about how you help people." Brian looked at his hands covered with calluses from years of work. "You know, Daisy, my father always said, do good and don't expect thanks. I just didn't think it was anything special." She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "But it is special. In our time, it is very special." He ran his hand through his graying hair. "Maybe, but I'll just keep doing my job. I always do." The phone rang at 9 in the morning. Brian was just finishing up the diagnostics on the old Volvo. He looked at the unfamiliar number and reluctantly picked up the phone. "Matthews Auto Repair." "Mr. Matthews, my name is Richard Morgan. I am the owner of the Good Auto chain. I have an interesting offer for you." Brian tensed up. He'd heard of Good Auto, the largest auto repair shop chain on the East Coast, known for its quality of service. "Yes, I'm in town on business. Can we meet for lunch today? Say, at the old corner at 1 o'clock? Brian hesitated. The shop was busy, and the line of customers hadn't diminished since that viral post. "Mr. Morgan, it's important." The voice on the phone became more serious. "Trust me, you won't regret it." At 1 o'clock, Brian sat in the old corner, feeling uncomfortable in his work clothes among the office workers. Daisy, who was just getting off work, came over to him. "Is everything okay, Mr. Matthews? Is this your first time here in—" "It's okay, Daisy. I'm in a meeting." Richard Morgan was a tall man of about 55, wearing an expensive suit but with the calloused hands of a man who knows what manual labor is. "I started out as a mechanic," he said, as if reading Brian's mind. 30 years ago, in my father's garage. Now I have 142 service centers in 14 states." He paused while Daisy placed their order. "I saw a story about you, about how you helped that woman." He nodded toward Daisy as she hurried to the other tables, and not just her. "I read the comments. All these people you've helped over the years. I'm just doing my job." "That's what caught my eye." Morgan leaned forward. "You do more than just a job. You restore people's faith in humanity. Do you know how many times I've heard from customers that they're afraid to go to a car service? They're afraid they'll get scammed, they'll get overcharged." Brian listened in silence. He knew it all too well. "I have a proposal." Morgan pulled out a folder. "I want to offer you a good auto franchise, for free, plus an investment to expand your shop." "What?" Brian almost choked on his coffee. "We'll upgrade the equipment, expand the space, and train your employees. If you don't already have them, we'll help you hire them. But most importantly, you will remain the owner, completely independent, just under our brand and with our support." "But why?" Morgan leaned back in his chair. "Because people like you are rare. You reminded me why I started this business. Not for the money, for the people." He opened the folder. "Here are the terms and conditions. You can show them to your lawyer. The first installment is $500,000 for renovation, the same amount for expansion within a year." Brian was dizzy from the numbers. "I need some time to think about it." "Sure," Morgan smiled, "but not too long. Opportunities like this don't last forever." After he left, Brian sat looking at the file for a long time. Daisy came over to refill his coffee. "Are you okay?" "I don't know." He rubbed his eyes. "Things are just changing too fast." "Change is good." She put her hand on his shoulder. "You deserve it." Back in the workshop, he sat down in his father's old chair. Max came over and put his muzzle on his lap. "What do you think, buddy?" Brian scratched him behind the ear. He looked at the walls that held so many stories, at the picture of his father, at the old tools that had served for decades. The phone rang, the bank again. This time Brian didn't hang up. "Yes, Robert." "Mr. Matthews, about your loan." "You know, Robert." Brian smiled. "It doesn't seem like it's going to be a problem anytime soon." He hung up and opened the folder with the offer. The terms seemed almost unrealistic. Complete independence in decision-making, the ability to set your own prices, retention of all old clients. It was getting dark outside. Brian left the workshop and looked back at the old sign. How many times had he repaired it, painted it, changed the light bulbs? Was he ready for change? An elderly man approached him, Mr. Parker, his oldest customer. "I saw an expensive car near the workshop today. Is there something wrong, Brian?" "Maybe, Mr. Parker. Maybe. Just don't change, boy. We need you just the way you are." Brian went back to his office and picked up the phone. He dialed Morgan's number but didn't press call. Tomorrow. He would think about it tomorrow. Today he still had 3 cars to finish. 6 months had passed like a day. Brian stood in front of his newly renovated workshop building. The old sign, Matthews Auto Repair, now shone with new letters, and the Good Auto logo was modestly placed below it. The parking lot had been expanded 3 times, but even it was sometimes not enough for all the customers. "Mr. Matthews." Mike, one of the new mechanics, called out, "Mrs. Wilson is here for her checkup." Brian snapped out of his thoughts. "Take her car to the third lift. I'll take a look at it myself." Mrs. Wilson hugged him as soon as she got out of the car. "Oh, Brian, how things have changed around here. But you know what? You're still the same." He led her to a new waiting area with comfortable chairs and a coffee machine. Daisy, who was now the receptionist, waved at them from behind the desk. "How's Michael?" Brian asked. "He's great," Daisy beamed. In the evening, when the main stream of clients slept, he sat in his office. It was now a spacious office with large windows, but his father's old chair still stood in the corner. On the wall was the same photo, only in a new frame. Max, already completely gray-haired, was dozing in his seat. Next to him was a new soft rug, a gift from his co-workers. Max slowly walked over to him, aged but still loyal. "Let's go home, buddy," Brian patted him. He looked back at his workshop. Now it was bigger, more modern, more successful. But most importantly, it remained a place where people could get help, where honesty and kindness still mattered. Brian smiled. His father would be pleased.